Just like you wouldn't buy a house based on what was best for someone else, don't send your kid to a school based on what's best for someone else, right? You want to make sure that what they're saying, if it is something that is good or something that you agree with, that also lines up with what is best for your child. Every parent has different priorities or different things that they believe would be most important for their kids. For myself, for example, I'm very much of the mindset that I was very big on Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we will be discussing schools, which is very much something that can come into play when you are in the process of a home search. For those of you who have children or are planning on having children at some day, this is a question that we as realtors get all the time from parents and just trying to figure out what the landscape looks like, right? Which schools are quote unquote the good schools, and can you find a home in those areas? And so I always tell people that that is a very difficult or complex question to answer, right? What is the best school for my child? There's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration, and it takes a little bit more than just simply going onto a website and figuring out 1 through 10 what ranking a particular website might have given a school, right? You don't know all that went into those algorithms. You don't know what things they may have considered, if it's just test scores, if it's certain items that they may be privy to, or maybe things that they don't even know about. They just may be going off of public opinion, right? There's any number of things that can be included, and you're not always sure. And so you don't want to just base your decision completely around, oh, this random site gave it a good score, so I'm going to assume that that's the best school for them to go to. There's a lot more things that you need to take into consideration. And so in this week's episode, we talk about several of the things that I typically recommend that people consider when they're trying to figure out what school may or may not work out best for their child. So the first thing that you definitely want to pay attention to is you want to determine the best learning style for your child. Every kid is different. We all have different styles that work out best for us. We all have different backgrounds and different cultures that we're coming from as well. And so you need to determine what is going to speak best to your child. Are they a visual learner? Are they a learner who is best by auditory? Maybe they hear things better and it helps them to get a better feel for it. You need to take all those things into consideration and figure out if that school could work best for them. It's not always a matter of, oh, this is a school that is popular and it works out for all these other people, so it'll work for my child as well. You need to understand what works best for your child and see if you can find a school that matches with that, right? What are their learning styles? What are their key principles that they're trying to consider, right? And do those things line up with what is best for your child? And sometimes that may be a little bit of trial and error, right? You may have to spend some time trying to figure out what works best for them, and you may spend a few months in one place and figure out, we might need to make a change. But you at least want to make sure that you are cognizant or at least aware of the fact that not every child is going to learn in the exact same way, and you need to make sure that that school lines up, at least in some ways, with that. There's a lot of schools and teachers and things who take those into consideration, but you need to understand if that's something that they even offer before you consider that school. I always talk to people too about writing just a list of what you want in a school, the resources that you want, what kind of teaching styles, what type of environment do you want that school to have. Write out the list, just like you would write out a list of things that you want in a home. Do that exact same thing for the school. Even if you're not certain whether or not you can easily find that information out, still write it down. That way you can have a general guide of what you're looking for. And when you maybe hopefully go visit these schools or start to look at them or research them more, you will have a firm blueprint of actually what you want in a school, right? It's difficult for you to say or convey to someone what you want if you haven't even written down yourself what you're looking for or what you would come to expect. And so that's why it's a great way for you to just sit down and determine what you're trying to get out of that school and what you would want it to be like, right? Do you want it to be an environment that your kid feels welcomed? What are the things that are important to you? That's always something that you want to take into consideration. Next up, I always tell people as well, research the test scores as well as the progress reports. Not every county does them, and some of them it may not be as updated, especially with the pandemic. That skewed a lot of figures as well, but you don't want to just look at the test scores, but you also want to look at progress reports, right? See how they are working or how they're going through certain items or how kids are getting better on a case-by-case basis, right? If you already have a bunch of kids who are very proficient in reading, it's difficult for you to tell like, oh, is that because of the school, or is it just because that they came from households where reading was one of the things that their parents really focused on teaching them, right? You want to understand whether or not the school is responsible for that or not. And one of the ways you can kind of get a clue into that is by looking at those progress reports, seeing how the kids have improved from the time they first started to the time that they actually in that grade. So you want to look at that and see what the kids are going through and if those teachers are doing a good job of teaching them, right? Because again, now this isn't to knock anyone in the teaching profession and stuff too, but if you're in a certain school, which is in a certain area, you might be getting a particular set of kids who are coming from households where they have more resources available to them, where they might have access to tutors. They might have access to more things that can help make them a well-rounded student before they ever even set foot inside of that school. And so if you have students like that, those teachers may not be having to do as much, or they may not need to be as talented at what they do as a teacher who's receiving kids who don't have those resources, who don't have access to those tutors or those different options available to them, right? And so these are things that you need to take into consideration, right? It's not just a matter of whether or not the test scores are high, but whether or not those teachers are really effective at being able to make complex topics or subjects easily learnable for those children. And so those are things that you need to make sure that you take into consideration. So look at those test scores, but also just look at the progress reports as well. The next thing, talk to other parents and just see what their experience may be like, right? You could end up in a situation where you find out that, yes, a school may be really popular and may be one that has a incredibly long wait list, but once you actually talk to the parents who are in there, you might find things that are a little bit different or things that may not line up with what you want. As always, take the information that you receive from them with a grain of salt. Just like you wouldn't buy a house based on what was best for someone else, don't send your kid to a school based on what's best for someone else, right? You want to make sure that what they're saying, if it is something that is good or something that you agree with, that also lines up with what is best for your child. Every parent has different priorities or different things that they believe would be most important for their kids. For myself, for example, I'm very much of the mindset that I was very big on diversity, and not just like racial diversity. I wanted economic diversity. I wanted religious diversity. I wanted as many different walks of life as possible to be in that building with my kids so that they wouldn't be in a bubble essentially where they're only surrounded by kids who think like them, act like them, who come from similar households or have similar beliefs. I wanted them to be able to understand that there's a lot of people out there who don't do things the way that our family does things, and that's okay, but you need to make sure that you understand that. When they're at home with us, we make sure that we teach them this is how our family does things, this is the principles, these are the beliefs that we hold dear to us. And there are other people out there who may not agree with that, and that's okay. But you need to make sure that your kids can interact and still learn from the people who may not always agree with them. And that's not only going to help them in a school atmosphere, but even when they get out into the workforce and start to work for companies or maybe even start companies of their own, it's going to be tremendous help to them if they can learn to get along and interact with people of all walks of life. And so that's what was important to me. There may be other people where they have more of a focus solely on the academics, so they may have a focus solely on the extracurriculars that are offered at that school. It's any number of things, but again, you want to make sure that you have at least talked to and interviewed other people to see what they think about that particular school. Next up, this is one that surprisingly doesn't get utilized as often as you would think, but I also tell people to visit the school as well. Visit it in person and just walk the halls, right? See if you can see what the facilities look like, what the venues look like, the environment that your kid is going to be in on a regular basis. I mean, most of these kids are in school for 6-7 hours a day at least. That's not even including if they do anything outside of school hours. And so they're going to spend a lot of time walking those halls and in those rooms and buildings. And it's important for you to just walk around and just get a sense for the building, right? Look to see how things are taken care of. Look to see the interactions that you see happening throughout the hallways, right? If you're there when other staff and faculty are there, look to see how they're interacting with the kids. Look to see how they interact with one another. Pay attention to all those different things. These are things that, again, you can't just get from a website that's giving out a random score and algorithm based on test scores. Those are things that you can only pick up on when you actually visit that school in person. And when you're visiting in person, you may even get an opportunity to meet some of the faculty, some of the staff that are there. And that, again, that's a great way to kind of determine what they're like. Every school has different staff, different principals, different faculty that are in there. And as a result, they also have different feels and different cultures and different vibes. My son, when he first started school, they had a new principal who was coming on board. And there was a lot of concerns, right? Because you don't know how things will change. Who the principal is has a very large effect or an impact on how that school operates, right? They may have all the same general principles and things that they need to follow based on the county standards. But outside of that, the principal very much determines the overall vibe and just the way that teachers interact and work in that building. And so we were very concerned just to make sure, like, hey, is this going to work out? And fortunately for us, we had an amazing principal. She's still there and does an awesome job. But again, that's something that could have a profound impact in the way that we view the school, right? And so those are all things that you want to pay attention to and try to learn as much about as you can instead of just hiding behind a computer screen trying to research these different schools. Next, look up the programs and events that are offered by the school, right? Look up any of the events they do. Maybe they do certain fundraisers. Maybe they have events just to kind of get to know you. So our school, our elementary school that my son attends, they will have meetups every now and then. The PTA will host different play dates, kind of where they'll host everybody coming together and hanging out and just getting to know each other and stuff like that. And they'll have spirit nights at different restaurants and stuff like that. And so look to see those type of events as well as the other events that are hosted as well, right? If it's a middle or high school, you may want to look to see some of the sporting events or different things they have going on. But look up those different programs and events and see if that's something that's in line with things that are important to you. Again, every school is different in the things that they prioritize or the things that are important. There are some schools where they may have a particular sport that is the holy grail of everything that school revolves around, right? It's how's the football team doing? And that's all that this school really rallies behind. And if that's important to you, that may be something that you may want to consider. If you're like, hey, I don't want a school that focuses on that or focuses on the sporting aspect of it, but I would rather if they had more of an emphasis on the arts. Again, figure out if that's something that your school offers something to help with, right? Do they have a chess club? Do they have a math club, right? Do they have different things out there that can speak to what your kid may be interested in? This next one, a very hot button issue, but it's a touchy subject in some cases, and that is to consider your budgetary restrictions. When it comes to schools, it's one of those topics where people can kind of throw caution to the wind when it comes to their finances, because we're all thinking that we want the best for our kids, and there are a lot of situations where people will convince themselves that they can push their finances to the brink or to right up to the line for the chance to get their kid into the right school that they want, and they'll find ways to justify spending an incredibly large amount of money that they may not have accessible in their budget. They'll find ways to justify it because they want to have the best for their child, or they want to have the best school for their child. Do not put yourself in a financial bind trying to get your kid into a school that you believe is better, even if that school may be better. Again, every kid has a school life and they have a home life. And I'm going to tell you right now, between those two, the home life is going to have a far greater impact on how that kid turns out than their school life. And so if you put all of this time and energy and money and effort into improving their school life, but do so at the sake of hurting their home life, it is going to have an opposite impact, or it's not going to have the change that you would want it to have. Kids can pick up on when things are tight financially, right? They can pick up on situations when their parents are stressed or where they're not sure how they're going to make ends meet. And so if you are putting yourself in a bind to get your kid into a certain school, it's going to have the reverse impact that you want it to have. And so again, consider the budgetary restrictions. If you decide that a private school or a school that has added expenses are what's best for your child, you need to first consider whether or not that actually lines up with your budget. If it doesn't, then we'll need to figure out some other examples or some other options that may work. But don't just throw caution to the wind and just spend whatever and just say, I'll figure out the rest later on. No, you need to make sure that that expense clearly fits within the lines of your budget. Next, find out the application process and timeline. My wife and I were just talking about this last night, but it is very difficult to determine the appropriate time that you should leave for all of the different schools that are out there. There's a lot of schools that have wait lists. There's schools that have caps on the number of kids who can attend. And however early you think you need to apply or consider applying, it's probably earlier, right? It's never too early for you to at least see what the timeline is looking like, right? You may want to consider like, hey, do we need to make that decision a year in advance, 2 years in advance? Is that going to line up with the wait lists that are in place for this school? Don't just wait until a few months before and say, oh, we'll just sign them up for whatever school is available, because the school that you want may not be an option if that's the case. And so you need to make sure as early as you possibly can, find out what the application process is like. And if there are any things that you need to consider, any backup plans that you need to have in place, all that needs to be done beforehand. Next up, attend the PTA meetings, right? You can attend those meetings and just get, a general feel of how involved people are in this school. The PTA is a great way to determine how involved the parents are. If the parents are involved, there's a high likelihood that that school is going to be performing at a higher rate than other schools that are out there. And so you want to see what the parents are doing. And if your kid does end up going to that school, I would highly recommend that you join the PTA as well, because again, that's a great way for you to have involvement in the school. The more involvement the parents have, the higher the likelihood the kids are going to perform better at that school, right? If your parents are actually walking the halls, if your parents are volunteering, that's going to ingratiate them with a lot of the staff and faculty there. And so you definitely want to have those connections and those relationships built as strongly as you possibly can. And so attend the PTA meetings, see who the parents are, see what kind of goals and things that they have for the school. And then it's also an opportunity for you to even meet the teachers and talk with them and see what their plans are as well. And so and the PTAs is a great way to do things. And then last but not least, this last point hits very close to home with me in my experience in going to different schools. But you need to make sure that whatever school you plan on having them attend, if it is a public school, that it is zoned for that property, and then don't make the assumption that just because the home that you're buying is zoned for a particular school, that your kid is guaranteed to go to that school. And so the way that it works in our county, in the area, Wake County is one of our biggest counties in Raleigh, but the way that it operates is that different homes and neighborhoods are zoned for particular public schools. And so they'll usually say, hey, everyone in this neighborhood is zoned for this particular school, and this one and this one. Obviously, there's always schools that people are going to prefer over other schools. And so in a lot of situations, we tend to run into situations where there are schools that have a cap, right, where they have reached the maximum capacity and they can no longer have any more kids registered to that school, in which case they would have them sent to a separate school. And that is one thing why I always tell people to be aware of, because there's no way for you to kind of bypass that situation, right? If you move into a neighborhood and that school is capped, you can't have them guarantee that they can make an exception or anything like that, which is part of the reason why I, as a realtor, will never guarantee someone placement in a particular school, no matter where they buy or no matter what home they purchase. Now, granted, if you're going into a private school situation, those obviously there's more leniency and stuff. But if you're looking at a public school or even like a charter school in some areas, like the wait list may be so long that you're not guaranteed in there. But with public schools that are zoned for particular neighborhoods, you can never make the assumption that it will always be the case. When I was in ninth grade, my entire neighborhood was zoned for a particular school, so we all went to that school. Everything was great. And then 10th grade came along, and they rezoned my entire neighborhood and districted us for a different high school that was further away. We would have had to drive past our old high school to get to my new one in this situation that had happened, right? Now, fortunately, I was in a situation where my parents were able to work out a carpool situation with another family in the neighborhood. And so we were still able to attend that one. We just got grandfathered in because we had attended in previous years, but we also didn't get bus transportation, right? So we had to figure out carpool plans in that case. And so that was a situation that let me know very clearly early on in life that just because a neighborhood is zoned for a particular school does not mean that it will always stay that way. And so you need to make sure that you have a clear understanding of that. Don't get attached to a particular public school that your neighborhood may be zoned to whenever you purchase that home, or don't buy a home just because it's zoned for a particular school. Never, ever do that, because those things are always subject to change, especially in an area that's growing as quickly as our area is. They could always make the decision to build a new school, and then you may get zoned to go there. And so all of these things are things that you need to keep in mind and more. I'm sure there's points or things that I missed or things that you also need to keep in mind, but I feel like that gives you a good groundwork of what you should consider. And more importantly, it also shows that you can't just look at a number scale 1 through 10 and determine whether or not that school is the right school for you. It takes more effort and more work. And again, our kids are more important to us than anything, and we want what's best for them. And if you truly want what's best for them, you won't just trust the number, but you'll do the actual time and research that it takes to determine what is the best option. Hope that's helpful for you guys. If you ever want to talk more about it, I'm always here to be a resource. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you next week.